Okay, so we will get started. So as you've just noticed, I've started recording the webinar, and anyone who's registered will receive a link both to the recording and also to these slides. So don't worry too much about copying down links. If there's something you're interested in, you'll have access to the slides afterwards. It may take a little time because the person who normally puts that together and emails it is, I think, out on leave all of this week, but I'll see if I can get that sorted sooner than a week later for you. Closed captioning is enabled, so you can use those if you want to see them. Hopefully they work well. There'll be plenty of time for question and answer at the end. You can pop questions in the chat or the Q&A through the webinar as they occur to you. I do not have second monitor today, so I may not spot them until the end, but hopefully we'll have a chance to answer anything. And if I don't get to questions, but you've popped them in, I can always send around answers afterwards. And also just to note here, clearly you found this webinar, but there are others. Equally though, if you are starting to use protocols.io and you would like to sign up for a live demo, that would essentially be a one-to-one session. If it's on this time zone, then you would be with me. But there are other ones that cover more Europe and different, Europe, American, and probably also Asian/Australasian time zones at the other end of the day. So today we'll run through why it's important to share research methods, also give you an introduction to protocols.io, the mission and the key functionality, as well as how you navigate through protocols.io, finding content that's already available on there, and also creating and sharing and publishing your own protocols on there if you're so inclined. And hopefully we will have time for Q&A. So we'll get started with a bit of framing of why this is an important topic. These are tweets here on the left from a biologist, in the middle from a physicist, and you'll see they've encountered the same problem, which is that when performing research, they have looked for details of how either a protocol was performed or how a device was fabricated in that middle tweet in already published research papers. And it turns out that those research papers either link back to an earlier citation, or eventually you're paywalled, you can't access the paper that's linked to, or perhaps the original progenitor research article may say something like, on that physicist one, devices were fabricated with conventional methods, which is not very helpful. So replication, finding, accessing, and replicating any of these experimental or methodological details is therefore a problem, which can be frustrating, as that GIF shows you. There's also another project that was performed a few years ago, which shows this very well, which was the Cancer Biology Reproducibility Project carried out by the Center for Open Science and Science Exchange in the US. And they wanted to repeat the experiments from just over 50 published, perceived important high-impact cancer research, published research articles. There's a really nice write-up about this effort in The Atlantic by science writer Ed Yong. He had interviewed the people who were involved in that project. And so there's an excerpt here, which is that the hardest part by far was figuring out exactly what the original labs actually did. So papers should have method sections with recipes for the same experiments. But often these recipes are incomplete, missing out important steps, details, or ingredients, and in some cases, the recipes aren't described at all. So you end up with this citation thread. But in this instance, they also spoke to the authors. And even though those authors had published those papers in recent years, they also didn't have the information in their notebooks or in their lab. There was not sufficient information available to repeat those experiments. So the kind of headline here was a subsequent science write-up when it was announced that they had stopped, they had given up on this project. So that plan to replicate 50 high-impact cancer papers was stopped after they'd attempted just 18 of them. At the bottom there is an even more recent summary of what was encountered, which is available on the Center for Open Science's website. And in that, they note that 0% of protocols were included in those papers. So that's 193 experiments from 53 papers, and 0% of them had enough information or was sufficiently well defined, which is pretty catastrophically bad. So papers and researchers don't have good information. But do we care if the methods can't be repeated or understood fully? I'd argue it's actually really important. So as we're virtual webinaring, I share cookies with you, but of the photo variety rather than real ones. This is taken from a baking magazine, and these cookies were all baked using the same recipe, but with a tiny tweak made to the recipe. So the changes in recipe led to very obvious phenotypic differences in the cookies. So if the cookies are your resulting data and your actual results, you can only analyze and understand those phenotypic changes, the size, the thickness, the texture. You can only understand and interpret those if you know what the changes were that happened to the method, what those tweaks were. So too much flour, sugar, baking powder, or baking time, etc. You know, what was different that led to a better cookie, a worse cookie? And so within science or research in general, that same philosophy holds true. If we share the data, but we don't know how they were produced, they are of limited reuse subsequently, and they're much harder to reproduce or fully understand and interpret at a later date. And just to emphasize that again, we now share lots and lots of data. The community as a whole has done very well at explaining and expecting that data generated through various research projects is made available for subsequent reuse. However, as I've just explained, if you do not have the methods, the reuse value becomes a lot more limited. So there's a brilliant quote I like, which is there in blue, from an evolutionary biologist, Dobzhansky. He said that nothing in biology makes sense except in the light of evolution. So I have edited that for my purposes here today. Nothing in research data makes sense except in the light of how it was generated. So the two things have to come together, is my my kind of take home really from this whole webinar, if you take nothing else away. So now I'll give you some insights into protocols.io. So I'm Director of Strategic Initiatives at protocols.io. Clearly, I have a bias towards this platform and tool, but it is a really excellent tool that will serve you to share methods details. Regardless of the research discipline that you work in, if you have a step-by-step method, protocols.io can be used to share the methods that you're generating. Our mission is very, very simple. We want to make it easy to share method details before, during, and after publication. So you can be creating content on there and working on it, optimizing it while you're performing the research. And then you can post it publicly. And so anything that's posted publicly becomes open access. So the default license is a CC by open access license. And so everything that's available publicly, it essentially serves as a repository for everybody else in the research community to access and potentially reuse. But anything you start working on initially is private. So you can do your research and optimize and tweak the method on the platform. This is just an overview slide, really. On the left is a slightly edited view of what the welcome page looks like. That URL at the bottom is a good place to start if you haven't looked at protocols.io before. But it gives you some snippets into the functionality, but it also lower down on the page has featured protocols. So you can kind of play around and see some of the nice ones that have been highlighted there. As noted here, it has this open access repository side to it, but it can be used across all research disciplines. So it's very well suited to wet lab research, but it's equally useful for computational pipelines. We see psychologists, social scientists, we see all disciplines using protocols.io. If there is a process or a SOP or a protocol to follow, it can be added. It's collaborative, so much like a Google Drive or a Google document, you can share selectively and collaboratively edit, and you can control the permissions that you give all of the other people that you wish to share with. Protocols.io functions in exactly that same way. Has quite a lot of active users these days. probably closer to 18,000 public protocols now, and well over 70,000 private protocols. So the public ones are that repository of open access content. The private ones are researchers who are actively using protocols.io to develop content. And the average views are people finding content that's publicly available through Google Scholar. So it's very discoverable content. It's indexed in a lot of places when you do publish on protocols.io. So this is just to kind of give you that overview of the research workflow. So I'm really looking here more at experiment-based research, but the kind of workflow where protocols.io then is at the heart. So you might start out at the top, defining the research question, outlining what you're going to do, planning experiments, making sure you've got all of the equipment, materials, and everything you want together in one place. And you can start either from content that's already available on protocols.io, or you can start writing and putting the content on protocols.io. You can share that collaboratively and edit with colleagues. You can also seek and obtain feedback via comments from people that you share the protocol with. Then you'll carry on, you'll start performing the methods. You can run the protocols on protocols.io and store a record of every run that you make where you keep information. And you probably won't have the great results you want initially. So you might end up tweaking the approach, rerunning, reanalyzing, and repeating. And so here you can record every run with comments, details of what works, what doesn't. You can have a date time-stamped record that will correlate with any results that you generate during that run of the method that you're running. So it allows you to really track your research, your day-to-day research. Eventually, hopefully, you get that to work and you have a successful experiment, successful method. And at that point, it's very, very trivial to post the protocol publicly and get a DOI. So this is akin to preprint posting, really. It's not peer-reviewed, but it will give you a permanent version of the protocol with a persistent identifier. So that's what DOI is. It's digital object identifier. Which will mean that version is static, cannot be changed, can be linked to from a research paper as the materials and methods if you want to do it that way, which is definitely encouraged behavior. And here's what that looks like if you do put the DOI for your method into a published paper. You can create individual protocols on protocols.io, or you can create a container collection that has multiple, if you have multiple protocols that are a part of a paper. So this was a PLOS biology paper. It's a few years old now, but in the materials and methods, you can see that they say methods and protocols for all of the various experiments are available as a collection in protocols.io, and they have that DOI link. If you click that DOI link, it brings you to protocols.io. And this is what's really nice. We call this dynamic permanence. That link will always take you to the version that was available at the time of the paper being published. But the authors can come along and create new versions. So we believe very much that research is often not a static one-time thing, but that it's actually more dynamic and evolving. And certainly methods tend to be always evolving. So with new materials, with new equipment, so a method can be improved. Or perhaps the authors made a mistake and then they can create a new version to fix any errors without needing a formal correction of the paper itself. So this is what we call dynamic permanence. And if you click to view the newer version, you'll just come to the most recent version of that, either collection of methods or individual method. There is functionality to compare very easily, so you can see what was changed between versions of protocols very easily if you want to track that back. We have links with many journals, so there are well over 500 journals and publishers who say, yes, please do put comprehensive methods details in protocols.io and link to them from your manuscripts that you're submitting to us. That's just a kind of general thing you can do. And we start to have closer links with some other publishers. We were actually acquired by Springer Nature last year. So we have added recently BMC methods here and Nature protocols, but we've had a long time partnership with PLOS ONE, who created a brand new article type in which you can publish a method, an approach, and the materials and methods has to be a protocol or more than one protocol posted on protocols.io. So there's lots of different ways you can explore. These tied in ones will see the protocol being peer reviewed as well as the paper at the same time. These other ones, it's more like a supplement to the paper. This is that lab protocols article type on PLOS ONE. So they're posted and you can see it's got its name is lab protocol. It is a little bit of a misnomer because it is not just lab research as exemplified by the very first one, which was this illustration for archaeological artifacts methodology. You then have a very prominent link to see the protocol at the top of the HTML view of the paper. And that's bidirectionally linked to the protocol on protocols.io, and we can show when a protocol has been peer reviewed. That would not generally appear at the top of a protocol. It's also linked in the materials and methods and added as a supporting information file, but you get a bit of an idea of how that then looks if you're using that article type. And so just to kind of give an insight into the value of posting the protocol separately or the methods separately from the paper, on the left here are some tweets. The first one was a researcher in Chile who was looking for RNA extraction experiments from primary cortical neuron cultures, so from brain cells, essentially. There were a few tweet replies, and Elena was a postdoc, I believe, at UCSF at the time, pointed to a specific protocol on protocols.io, which is very clearly an RNA extraction protocol. But when we look closely at that protocol, it actually came or is linked with as part of the methods for this GigaScience paper, looking at a 3-spine stickleback parasite. So that's a fish parasite. So having the methods posted separately meant that the method is discoverable as an independent research output from the paper. And if you only had the paper, it seems very unlikely that someone excuse me, someone looking for a method on neuron cultures, on brain cells, would have gone to this paper on a fish parasite as a potential source of the method that would be of value to them. But because it exists as a standalone, we have this facilitation of discovery of the method independently, hopefully improved reproducibility, but it also just facilitates these incredible research connections. These people would not have come across one another but for the fact that the method has its own modular representation. So benefits, hopefully, have impressed upon you. You can use it to manage and share research data and protocols. So this can be a really central place for a whole team to store, share, interact, and work on. So that can, in turn, simplify teamwork and improve collaboration, which also, in turn, can just help save time and keep work organized. It is an entire workflow tool, but for teams or a project or whatever form of group you would be working in, you can organize content in those group workspaces. So I'm going to pass on now to navigating protocols.io and run through a few things that you'll expect to see, keeping an eye on time. So I mentioned a little bit, it works as a public repository. So if you just want to come and poke around and see if there's anything on there that's of interest to you in your research discipline, if you come to this welcome page, there's a search bar at the top. So you can add whatever your search term, your methodology or organism or whatever it is of interest to you in here. And it will bring you up a page of results. So this is results for PCR, and it will default load you publications which are posted publicly available protocols, and we'll try and order it sensibly on things like reuse or visibility of those protocols. So you can go in and have a play around. If you're not so much interested in publications, there's a toggle there and you can see you can search for people who might be working and have expertise in whatever that keyword search is you've used, news or other workspaces and so on. If you searched for workspaces, so for example, this is searching organoid and then workspaces, you can find some big public available workspaces that you might want to join if it's an area that's of interest to you. Sorry, I'm kicking my desk if everything moved then. So here, for example, organoid and assembloid workspace is a publicly open one. So you could come in if you're interested and join that workspace and then interact with the members and see the content that's in that workspace. There is a place to have discussions with people. So it can be a really good kind of collaborative location to find people who might be working on content that's of interest to you. This format, though, of a workspace equally can be kept private. So if you want to have a workspace for your team, for your lab, you can set that up so that it's private and you control who the members are, and that would not then show up in the search results. So it would be just your personal working location. If you haven't done so yet, anyone can sign up for a free account. Free account does have some limited elements to the functionality, but you basically can do almost everything that you would need. Very, very easy to sign up. Some institutions and organizations do have an institutional access account. If you're somewhere, you can check by clicking on this drop down to see whether you have that or not. If you don't, you'll just have to sign up with your own either personal or institutional account. We do recommend using institutional accounts because then we can track when we have a number of users in a location to try and work with you to see if there's capacity to advocate for that license at your location. With the free account, you can have 2 private files, but you can publish as many protocols as you want. So once you make a protocol publicly available, you can have another private file. So it does limit your ability to have a lot of content on there, but it does fully support open research and making content publicly available. If you don't have the license and you're interested in trying to persuade your institution to take one out, please do feel free to email us and we'd be happy to work with you to discuss ways that we might be able to help contact the right people in your locations. So this is just kind of going over those user account options, the free account, which I've just talked through. You can have public protocols and public workspaces, public versions and forks, but you will be limited to 2 private protocols. The content is all preserved as any content always is on the platform. And we would obviously offer basic support level if you needed help with anything. It is possible to just pay for a single workspace. So if a lab or a team wants to just pay to have a workspace for a few lab members to work in, that's paid per user per month or annually for the number of users. And that would have maybe a bit more training and dedicated support. And at that point, within that workspace, you could have unlimited private protocols. Then there's the institutional license, which is when there are a certain number of users at an institution, is the most cost-effective way to have that. And we would set up things like single sign-on, and then every researcher would be able to have unlimited workspaces and protocols. So really just opens up the ability to have multiple projects or teams on there collaborating with, et cetera, et cetera. So when you're using protocols.io, there's a few different views that you would become familiar with over time. The file manager is, as it sounds like, the location to organize content, access any workspaces you're in. Different ones would appear on the left-hand side, so you can navigate around, access all of the folders and files and everything that's on there. If you're working creating protocols, then there's the editor, which also has a view version. So you can toggle between editor and viewer to create content and make sure it looks how you want it to look on the platform. And there's a lot of functionality in there, which I'll skim over in a little bit. Then every workspace that you belong to, which I already said, they can either be public and visible to everybody or invisible private locations for collaboration. They also have a profile view, which I showed you for that organoid workspace, where you can see who the other members are and interact with. And that's kind of the hub location for the profile. At the top level view, where the file manager gives you the behind scenes view, if you like. So that's just the file manager. When you're in there, you can create folders in your file manager to organize your content, however makes sense to you. It might be different working groups, or it might be something like this, published, unpublished, protocols in development, etc., run records. It's easy and trivial to drag and drop files into this workspace to just keep them. So if you've currently got protocol files scattered all over the place, you can just drag them into here, and then you know that they'll be stored somewhere centrally where you would always be able to find them. I'll show in a bit how you can connect as well to apps, various external drive locations, and some electronic lab notebook type locations to push content out if you want to export from protocols.io. And of course, everything's high level security, backup, and well looked after. This is again showing you the profile view. So this is another open community that we have that you could go and have a look at if you're interested in playing around a bit more, the coronavirus method development community. And on there, you can navigate between the various different, see the members, see all of the publications. Publications can have categories, so you can pick the ones that you're interested in. I think this group has things like sequencing or public health, different categories, so you can selectively view just some of the protocols on there. Every workspace has at least one designated administrator. It starts out being the person who creates it, but you can change that over time. You can assign more than one administrator if you want, and they then have full control over how members can join, the permissions, all of those features and functionality available to configure privacy settings, rights, etc., within that entire workspace. This just shows how you can go from the file manager view on the left-hand side. I mentioned before, if you belong to multiple workspaces, they show up on the left, and you can open that out, and it gives you this access to view either administration, if you're the administrator, to view all the settings, or also the workspace folder, which is that file manager view, or the profile, which is that profile view. So that's how you can just navigate around. And if you are the administrator and you look in there, you'll see access to workspace settings, manage members, various different things. I won't get bogged down in details here, but if you do play around, you're encouraged to go and have a look, because there is a lot of configuration that's possible. But you can come in, view the workspace settings. This is where you can choose if it's a private. They start out private, the workspaces, but if you want to make one public, you can change that here. You can change how members can be added, if it's just invitation only, etc., or what those things are. And that's how the invitations work. You can put in email address, or you can grab a link and send a link so people can just join using that link. So there's a lot you can do in here as the administrator. And when you're ready to start creating content, if you want to make a protocol, when you're in that file manager again, if you click on new, you can pick new protocol. You'll say where you want it to be created, which folder. And then you'll find yourself in the editor. And this is a blank protocol. So what you have is a very blank template, which is why it can work for any research discipline, because you can add absolutely anything in here that follows a step-by-step approach. So just to kind of run through, because it looks like there's a lot on this editor, on that left-hand side are all of the tools for kind of adding steps, adding sections into the protocol, deleting. It's kind of allows you to format the steps, and the visual way that the protocol flows is on the left-hand side. At the very top, there are these tabs. Each one has different boxes that you can complete. I'll show you them in a little bit more detail in a bit, but relevant information, again, if you play around, click through, have a look at what's under each tab, and think about how that might apply to your protocols. This here is a standard formatting toolbar. So here you've got, font, ability to insert attachments, images, movies, justify, subscript, superscript, add a table, all of those things, completely standard, really, toolbars. And then along the right, these are other other functional elements of protocols.io. And again, I'll show you those in just a moment, but it just sort of helps you to see that there's a reason to the segregation of the different pieces of what's on that editor. So on that right-hand side, well, first, just to say, if you've started adding steps, that this is what they look like. If you've made a section, you can give it a section head, whatever suits you for your protocol. So that can be a very good way to create structure to a multifaceted experimental approach, or something that takes place over multiple days, and those become color-coded. And then on the right-hand side, like I've jumped one, I did, sorry, I must have skipped through. At the very top are components, detailed components. And when you click on there, it will open out all of these components for you. So these are often more relevant to wet lab research, although if you toggle under all, you'll see there's a subset that we think are more likely to be useful for computational, and so on. But they allow you to format and recognize quantities, so amounts, volumes, or designate a sample, add temperature, add duration. If you've added things like volume or duration, then if you do use protocols.io to run the protocol dynamically, you can scale. So if you have at some point a recipe to create buffer, a master mix, something where there are multiple volumes, you can scale on the fly up if you want to create more in that run. Similarly, you can run a timer if you've put durations in and things like this. So it's a great way to add format and recognize variables that exist within the protocol. If we come down, there's comments here too, and I'll show you more about comments after, but we also then have granular editing history. You can click that and it will show you the history of changes for the protocol. So if something goes wrong and you want to jump back a few steps, if you click back, like on a Google document, you can revert back to that earlier version of the protocol. With a free account, I think you only keep 10 steps of history. With a license, you have full access to the full history. Can also be concurrently edited. So only I am in that protocol. So you see my avatar here, but if I'd shared this with someone else and they were editing it at the same time, in the same way as a Google Doc would show you multiple people editing, you would see who else was in that protocol at that time. Those color-coded sections I mentioned before actually create a table of contents. So you can see that and use that to navigate when you're editing the protocol, but you can also see that on a published, or when you're viewing a protocol, you can click and it opens it up on the left-hand side then as a table of contents. We have a completion status, which tries to kind of nudge you along the way of including information that will make a nice comprehensive protocol. I don't know how many people use that, but it is actually a really nice piece of functionality. And that's pretty much it. Sorry, I should just say everything's step-by-step format. So you can do a lot. There's tons of functionality in there. There's additional webinars that are more kind of tips and tricks, which would be more live demo style. So if you wanted to see some of those, you're encouraged to join one of those webinars another date. But what if you already have a lot of protocols in somewhere, Word document, Google Drive, somewhere, but you'd like to get them into protocols.io? You've got various options. Drag and drop, which I mentioned before. If you have a file manager, you can just drag the files in, put them into the file manager so they're central here. Your second option, which is a tiny bit better, is to create a stub for an actual protocol on protocols.io and then attach the document to that. And the reason why that's slightly better is because if you give it a title and some keywords, it becomes more searchable for you internally, whether you publish it or not. Even internally then, if you put the keywords for the specifics of the method, then you can search for that yourself. Next is import steps from text file, and I'll show you that in a moment. And last is import service, and I'll show you that too in a little bit. But so there are options if you do already have protocols around. So this is the insert steps from text. So if you're in the editor, so this is where you have an existing protocol and it's got steps and they're in a text file or even a PDF, Word doc, whatever it might be. You click through to that and it will prompt you to add the text. And I've done a little movie which hopefully will play through and show you how that actually works. So you would click to insert steps from text. If you have content, in this case, there's a protocol that's in a Google Doc. So I go across and it's got steps 1 through 16, which I can select and copy. Hopefully that's, yeah, I can talk faster than I clearly was able to actually do it. And then I paste those in here. I always recommend paste and match style because it will stop getting kind of Word or other format tagging. And then you click preview, it will show you there you've got steps 1 through 16 and it's separated them out. And then you click import and they're all pulled in. What it won't do is add the components or anything like that. So you can still improve how that looks, but it is a really easy way to not have to copy paste 16 steps individually and just pull in, or however many you might have in an existing protocol. You can just pull them in automatically. Excuse me. For any protocol, we just always recommend including as much information as possible. So I mentioned the tabs earlier too. So under description, you can add abstract, upload an image to make it more visibly findable for yourself, list all of the authors, provide a lot of other essential information if a disclaimer is relevant, if you have funders you want to acknowledge. You can attach documents here if you want. Equally, you can attach documents within individual steps. You can link a manuscript citation, put image information if you've used an image. Under the guidelines and warnings, as you've got guidelines, you have before you start, you have warnings. You can add an ethics statement, or if you don't need the ethics statement or just showing it, you can state that ethics should be obtained before running a protocol if it's kind of mouse or other specific animal or field work activity that might require ethics approval. You can add safety warnings and you can flag if you intend for it to be kept confidential. So if you're working in your team and you've something that you really don't want them to share beyond, but you want them to take a look, you can flag that up here very easily. There's also references as a tab. So if you include references in individual steps, they will show up here automatically if you use the reference component. But you can also list them here if you want. And materials, again, same thing. You can include and search for reagents and materials in the protocol steps and they'll automatically populate, or you can just add a list here. On that top toolbar is the ability to insert either image or video or embed media. And I'm just highlighting this because one of the benefits of using a dynamic tool like protocols.io is that you can include a lot more information and visual prompting to make sure that your methods are more reproducible. And images and movies are one brilliant way to do that, actually. So image or video, that works from your phone. If the video is up to, I forget what the size limit is, but at the smaller end of size of video, you can do that straight from your phone or straight from a video that you've got on your device and add that in. If it's a larger movie, which is bigger in size, then we recommend putting it onto YouTube or Vimeo or any of these video platforms. You don't have to make it fully publicly available. If you click share in whichever environment that is, you will have option to embed video and you can copy paste this iframe text, the formatted text from that embed code and paste that into, if you've clicked embed media, you'll see this embed media code box opens up. If you put that in, this is how it will format essentially into your protocols.io, pull it straight in. I noted earlier the ability to export content from protocols.io. It's really, really easy to do. And obviously people sometimes want to know that they'll be able to get content off over time if they want to move it somewhere else or export copies for themselves. It's really easy to do this too. So under more, either on the protocol or from the file manager, you can click export PDF, similarly here, PDF, and you can add apps. And if you click to add apps, it will bring you here and show how you can sign in, configure a link with wherever you have an account, Dropbox, Box, OSF, Google Drive if you want, OneDrive, and the electronic lab notebook, lab archives. And once you've set up that link with your account in that location, you'll be able to export directly into those locations. Just to note too, that from the electronic lab notebook perspective, we are working on some other integrations that will hopefully come through the next year, but there are also integrations with both RSpace and SciNote, but for those, you access protocols.io from the electronic lab notebook. So you can pull content from protocols.io with those integrations. So there's two ways of setting them up. Once you've added your content and you're happy with it and you're ready to publish, or if you don't want to publish but you want to share, you can do that really easily from any of these locations. So share is a very obvious button when you're editing the protocol. Equally, you can get to it if you click more on the view version of the protocol. You can then add people that you want to share with by email, or you could share with another workspace. You can choose how you do this, and you can configure the rights that the people have that you share with. Similarly, publish or reserve DOI or post draft is visible from all of these locations. If you're in the file manager, you'll see all of these options on the right-hand side as well. And again, publish or reserve DOI, it's a 6-step process that you walk through, make sure that you've shared some specific metadata, so we won't let you go ahead if you haven't added an abstract, for example. You have to declare if funding is not relevant or add funder information, have to have authors, etc. And assuming everything you've complied, then you'll go ahead and post the protocol. If you don't have a premium account, it will be screened before it's posted, so there may be a lag of a day or so. If you're somewhere with a premium license, then it happens straight away. We do look after the fact to keep an eye on what's being published, but we don't screen before they're posted for those people with those licenses. Commenting, I mentioned earlier, this is really powerful. If you're developing private content and getting feedback internally, it's a great way to communicate with colleagues. So maybe group leader wants to add comments onto the protocol that a student is creating. They can give that feedback, make a comment on individual steps or also on the protocol as a whole. If you've done it like this when you're developing, you can clean them all off during the process of publishing so that if you're ready to publish, it's clean, it doesn't have any comments on it. The publishing functionality also exists for posted protocols, and this is a wonderful way for authors to answer a question once in a public location, and then anyone else who comes and looks at the protocol who may have the same question will already be able to see that it has been asked and answered. And I think it's been very beneficial for authors as well as obviously readers or users who want to repeat experiments to see that back and forth, that public FAQ, if you will. That works very well. So I always say that on research papers and publications where commenting functionality is available, it's very, very rarely used. But on protocols.io, this is really interactive location where people come. You can see this cut and run protocol has 123 comments. There is a lot of interaction and requesting advice and feedback given from authors. It's very collegial and very constructive. And then I think I'm coming close to the end. I've forgotten how many more slides, but not too many more, I don't think. The protocol import service that we have, licenses come with this as an added extra, so it can really help a new user to start using the tool if they have a protocol that you've already got as a Word file or a Google Doc or a PDF. You can submit it to us, and we have a team of editors who will treat everything confidentially, and they manually will import your protocol into the best representation it can be on protocols.io using all of the functionality that we have to offer. A second editor will review and hopefully spot any errors, because there is a manual element to this. And then we would ping you, your protocol has been imported, please review it. You'll have the opportunity to review and request changes, and that's done using that commenting functionality. the editors would make changes, and at that point, hopefully you're happy, you accept, and we will transfer the ownership of the protocol back to you. So this can be a brilliant thing if you have existing protocols and you haven't got much time to get those protocols put onto protocols.io, and then they're available in that lovely dynamic format. It is a service that's open to people without licenses as well, but then it's a charged service. And once you've submitted something, it's from your profile, you can access protocol entry and track the progress, but you'll also receive emails periodically when the status has changed and it's ready for you to do something for the next step. People can use protocols.io for teaching. I won't get bogged down in this, but just to make that kind of an awareness that if you put content on here, you can create it in a very didactic way where you would give more information about configuration of software, file naming convention, what observations a student perhaps should be making and looking for. So you can change how you would structure content on protocols.io depending on who your user is intended to be. But the lovely thing is one copy on protocols.io can be accessed by hundreds of students if it's a large talk course, for example. You could also use it for teaching students how to write up content well as well, write up their methods. I did note earlier that, journals and publishers over 500 recommend. More and more funders are requiring this alongside data management plans is also information about how methods are going to be shared. And some even go as far as making it a requirement. So there's a funder it's global, funding people globally, but based in the US, called Aligning Science Against Parkinson's. And they require posting protocols on protocols.io. Some teams at Moore Foundation similarly and CZI similarly are strongly encouraging and creating communities of their researchers on here. And this is just various institutions that do have licenses. That's a growing number all the time. That is just to reiterate, you can see if your organization already has a license, and if not, definitely encouraged to get in touch with us if it's something you think your institution would benefit from. And now I think I am pretty much done. Hopefully we've still got 10 minutes yet for Q&A. Just reiterate the key benefits, but if you've got questions, please start adding them and I will try and change things on my screen so that I can see any questions that have come through. And I will think, yes, that is the last slide. My email's on here too. Reminder, as I've said, we will share the slides, so you don't need to kind of copy everything down. I'm going to stop the share so I can look at the questions, hopefully. Just need to move things around on my laptop. There we go. So I can see there was one question in there. Thank you for the useful webinar. Thank you. I have two questions. One, where can we see the list of journals that accept protocols.io for linking protocols? So we don't have an exact list of journals, but we have never, ever heard of a journal saying, no, we would not accept that. And we know that many, well over 500, and that was pre-acquisition by Springer Nature. So now if you add all Springer Nature journals who may not have had that explicitly stated previously, it's probably closer to 1,000, if not more. And we have never heard of a journal saying, we will not take your paper because you've posted a protocol on protocols.io. So to our knowledge, I think any journal would accept that. If you find a journal that doesn't, please let us know and we would talk to them. But I actually feel quite confident, especially in this day and age when people are much more kind of conscious of reproducibility and the benefits of sharing detailed methods. I'm quite confident that no one would probably say no, unless it was a competing methods journal, potentially, in which case they might be less keen. Second part of that question, when creating a new protocol, is it possible to upload a full text and then modify the format for the various sections and steps? Thanks. So I think that's a bit like that import of steps version from a text file that I showed. You could add the full text of an article if you wanted, but it doesn't really make sense to do that. It's really designed to just have steps, But essentially there are, the place for abstract, the place for before you start, doesn't have kind of context like introduction, results per se, or discussion locations. So it doesn't mirror a paper, a full research paper, but there's a lot of the parts in there that would be accommodated from a research paper. But when we have those tie-in relationships with journals like PLOS One, you submit the protocol to protocols.io, but you are still submitting a paper to the journal that has all the other peripheral parts, kind of abstract, contextualizing what the method is, if it's been validated, why it's better than previous methods, and so on, that have to go into the journal article format. Hopefully that's answered that. Let me know, Maria, if there's more nuance to that question that I've missed. There's a second question, how the reliability of a protocol is assessed before assigning a DOI. That is a great question. We do not assess the reliability of a protocol before it's assigned a DOI. So I mentioned earlier, it's more like a preprint server in that regard, in that you can post content. It is not peer reviewed by us. We screen to make sure it's not pseudoscience or spam, to weed out truly ridiculous things. And we do get a lot of CBD gummies and keto plan submissions that are not making it through, but we are not otherwise peer reviewing or checking reliability. What happens is after posting, the good methods will float up. There's a button I didn't show you, but there's a works for me button. So if someone reproduces a method, they can click works for me. And so you get an indicator with the metrics of how viewed, how many people have downloaded or exported a protocol. If people have clicked that works for me button, and track over time like that. But there is no block to you getting a DOI beforehand. We just hope people are putting good content on there, essentially. Hopefully that answers that question. And then Inez, thanks so much for the presentation. One question, in the methods section, you provide the link, but is the info in the link sufficient, or must you still describe all the methods? This will depend on the journal. What's your experience? That's exactly right. It will depend on the journal. Pretty much standardly, though, I think they will be happy if you simply give kind of a one-sentence summary of what the method was. So, we were using CRISPR, we were using Western blot PCR, or just a very, very high level. This is the kind of approach that we took. For the full details of how they were performed, please see the protocols on protocols.io. But I do think it probably is journal specific, whether and I imagine also reviewers might sometimes say, we need a little bit more, or it's okay, you don't need it. So I think that's probably a bit variable depending on, I think you kind of want enough in the paper so that someone would have the general idea of what approach was taken. But you definitely don't need to be trying to put in quantities or specifics if you've got everything on protocols.io. Hopefully that answers your question. That was the last of the questions in there just now. Just check the chat too. So I don't think there's anything in the chat. I'm happy to stay for a few more minutes. So if anyone's still typing, please pop in questions. But my email, actually, I'll stop the recording while I remember. My email was in the slides